Good. I am unmuted. Excellent. Good morning, everyone. That's a good start. Hello, welcome to the Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe, and I'm your host for this show. If you are new to the show, the Hacktoberfest Help Desk is a resource for you this Hacktoberfest, rapidly drawing to a close, where we give you all the tips and tricks you need to make the most of Hacktoberfest, to land your pull requests, and in a wider topic, to make the most of your career. So we've got special guests coming to you every day this week and every day for the month. This is show 54, I believe. We are very near at the end, and if you enjoy what you see today and you want to see more, stick around at the end, and I will run through our schedule and help you find more excellent shows. Hey Todd, hey That Copy, thanks for joining us. Our guest has already dropped spoilers. I mean, obviously we announced the guest in advance, so what am I talking about? I'll bring on Prince very shortly and we'll kick off. In the meantime, a couple of bits of house administrivia to go through. As I said, we are here to help you, and as you've already found, you found the chat. Please keep chat going throughout. Ask questions. They can be related to what we're talking about or not. We will get to those questions and hopefully answer all of them before the end of the stream. Just a little note for you though, our chat is actively moderated both by myself and by bots. So if at any point you want to share a link, for example, links are auto-modded because the internet is a scary place. But if you want to post a link to a resource or to something you're working on or to anything like that, that's no problem. We'd absolutely love that. Just let me know by mentioning @RaiseDevs that you want to post a link, and I'll add you to the permit list so that you can post those links and share with us all. If you don't do that or you forget that, that's fine. It happens at least once a show. The bot will just delete your message and put you in the corner for 5 seconds. So don't panic. I will catch that and then add you to the permit list, and you can post it again when you're back from your trip to the timeout zone. So that is that message. First of all, not first of all, next up, I mentioned that we have a packed schedule this week. You can find that schedule at twitch.tv RaiseDev schedule. Again, I'll run through that at the end of the show. This is our first of 3 shows today. The next show on this channel after Prince is the Dev2 Takeover. That's when the lovely folks from Dev, the developer blogging and community site, take over the show. I go have a coffee, and they have a wonderful time working on Forum, the Ruby and Rails app that powers their website. They're doing a cool no-code accessibility challenge today, and I know Todd was hanging out with us last time they did accessibility and was giving them some tips. So that'll be super fun. They're the next show up after this, and I'll talk about the rest of the schedule after the show. So stick around for that. And then the final thing from me, if you haven't heard of Raise.Dev, lucky you, I've got great news for you. Raise.Dev is a service that helps you level up in your developer career. And the way we do that is with matching you up with expert coaches who have wonderful experience, wonderful backgrounds, and they will help you get the experience you need to make the next step in your developer career, whether you're trying to get your first job after a boot camp or after a career change, like many of our guests, or whether you are trying to level up from mid-level to senior, become an engineering lead. Any of those like big, scary transitions and jumps that you might want to make in your career that you're like, oh, I'm not sure I'm ready for this, or I'm not sure I've got everything that I need for this, we will help you get that experience. And we are completely for free whilst we're in early access at Raise.Dev. So that is everything from me. I can now bring on our guest. Please welcome Prince to the stage. Hi, Prince. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's far too early for you. So thank you. I appreciate you making the time for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the folks in the chat?
Yeah. As you mentioned, my name is Prince. I work as a software engineer, software developer over at a company called Newsella. Newsella is focused around creating educational content for students in K through 12, so kindergarten through 12th grade.
Yeah.
And we do that by taking news articles published by like New York Times, the AP, National Geographic, and we actually level that content to match the students' reading levels. So that way students at different reading levels can read that. Nice,
and get to consume news. Wonderful.
Yes.
Cool. So I guess to give a little spoiler of what we're going to be doing in the show and how the show is going to work for the folks watching Paranoid Android, that's a great question. We'll get to that in a moment. So to give an idea of how this show is going to work, we're going to talk a little bit about your career and how you end up at Newsella and all the things in between, covering lots of cool educational things. And then I believe we're going to flip over and go from you working on educational projects to you learning some things yourself and talk about a recent journey doing Rust. And also I want to talk about the party corgis because it's been the best Discord I've ever joined. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I guess to kick off, Prince, do you want to answer this question from Paranoid Android?
My very first note here was like, oh, great question. The first thing to note is I actually do Twitch streaming myself.
Yeah.
So this is like part of the investment to myself and making sure that I have like my own audio setup and whatnot. But primarily, I also do educational content in general. So I work as an instructor at a company called Egghead at egghead.io, which produces screencasts for people learning about web development. So that's the reason why, is because part of the work that I do is to make sure that people can hear me clearly and like get the high quality content that they need to.
For sure. And Egghead is super amazing content. I was subscribed to Egghead for a long time, back before I was a freelancer and had an L&D budget. And it was like, it's some of the best content I've ever consumed. And I guess more widely, Paranoid Android. A lot of the guests that have been on this show were people that in a normal year would be out speaking at conferences a lot. And so obviously that's not happening. So they've had to find other ways to talk to people and educate people. And so we've all become streamers this year. That is what has happened to our reality.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was like part of something I was looking at doing in the beginning of the year, actually, where I was like, oh, I really want to find ways of reaching people that doesn't mean like traveling. Cause like traveling is very draining for me. As much as I love going to see new places, I really want to be able to meet them right where they are. Cause the other part of the problem is like people don't always want to travel to those places.
For
so
sure.
Like,
or how do I get to every like conferences are very exclusionary processes, really. Yeah.
So I feel like this is just the way to bridge the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into your career. So as I said, like you're working at New Seller, and I really want to hear more about that because that sounds super awesome. And I said to you before the show, I feel like I haven't spoken to you about New Seller since you joined. But I want to go back, reset the clock a little bit first, and talk about where everything started for you. So I think I first met you, and this is a common theme on this show. First met you through the hackathon scene. Where did like your interest in development and this space come from?
Yeah. So I'm going to start like probably towards the beginning. At the very beginning of time, young Prince life, Prince was like, I want to be a game developer. My uncle gave me a programming book, and I was like, oh, that would be awesome. I love this idea. It was in C#, and I opened it and I was like, I understand nothing that I'm reading, so I'm going to close the book and put it away.
Perfect.
Once I got into university, I was like, okay, or looking at university, I was like, oh, maybe I want to do this now.
Yeah.
My dad was like, no, you don't get to do that. And I'm like, okay, cool. But I ended up going to a state school inside of Florida, where I got to study computer science. And that's really what set off the chain of reactions for me, is where I got to learn about development.
Right.
I got to, get introduced into hackathons, which I think was like the crystallization of like my interest in ed technology in general, because it's like the way that we can think about how do we build apps that meet people's needs, and how do we do that by surfacing community. And that's like really where the journey all began.
That's awesome. So we've already had a bunch of questions for you. The worst dev. Hey, Ramon. Thank you for joining us. The worst dev just said C#, which is actually a question I had. So like, was it a Unity flavored book, or was it just like, hey, like you're going to be writing just from scratch, writing games in C#? That is wild. Okay, cool. Nice.
Yes.
Awesome.
Very
deep end. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like 2D sprites kind of stuff, but it was like before Unity was a thing.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, cool. And then Todd's got a question, but we'll get to that when we get to the current times.
Yes.
Perfect. Cool. So joined a computer science degree and discovered hackathons. That was like kind of like a big catalyst. So when obviously that happened and you were participating in those, like how were you thinking about what am I doing after this at the time? And so the reason I asked that, I guess, to give some context, is like, I don't know if it's a similar experience to you. For me, when I joined computer science, like because of what was, I guess, visible to me as a computer science student, I was very much like, oh, cool. Like, I guess after this degree, I go and join Accenture or like some consulting firm that I do Java for the rest of my life. And it was like hackathons that meant like, oh, actually, hang on, there is more. So I'm interested, like whether that experience like rings true for you, or how you were feeling at the time.
Yeah. When I was going through university, I was very much like, is this all we do? Is we talk about theory and that's like the job? And hackathons really showed me that there's so much that we use day to day that I never considered, that there are people, technologists that are building these things that make this happen. And hackathons also showed me like how accessible it can be to build something, which I think really surfaced like, this is something I want to do because I find it exciting to build some like from imagination. And I think the biggest thing that hackathons gave me, and this is like where my striking point was community.
Right.
The ability to say like, this is my community and I can cultivate that community. And like,
right.
That's what I love.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super cool. Hey, Manish, thanks for joining us. Perfect. You're in the right place, Manish. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to throw them in the chat anytime and we will try and answer them as we go through the show. So yeah, great. So what was your, I guess from that hackathon experience of finding your community, like where did that lead you career-wise?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very loaded question.
Like, honestly, at first, the very first hackathon I went to, right. So I live in Florida, so like that's right. the bottom part of the US. I went to Iowa.
Yeah.
So like the mid states
right.
at this point. And I traveled and I got to see my very like first like talk from
right.
this person. She was talking about accessibility.
Right.
And at the time she was like working at Venmo. And I was like, you like gave such a great talk. And like, I want to do like what you do. Like that's the job. So my very first job outside of university was developer relations, which is like a big step because normally that field is like very centered around like people who have been like in their careers for a very long time are now trying
grad
to
roles are super rare.
Yes. But getting the opportunity to cultivate community was like part of that role. And like that felt very aligned with who I was. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, this is the work I want to do, developer education, and then also be able to like take it further for people. Cause I think we sometimes say like, oh, like being a developer, like you just have this like linear progression. But I think that's a misconception is like, there isn't just like, you just are a developer for life. Like you can do other roles and there's other roles that are also like exactly the developer kind of aspect.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that we are very keen at doing here in Raise in general, but I've featured like a lot of folks on the show that like, hey, like wanting to work with code doesn't just mean you're going to be doing software engineering, and there are other ways of doing this. So we've seen lots of people like program managers and DevRel people and all that kind of thing through the show who've spoken a little bit about that. So that first DevRel experience, obviously you're not doing DevRel now.
Yeah.
Was there, I mean, this is a difficult one because like you're not doing DevRel now, but like through Egghead and the things you've done in the intermediate stages, we're still doing so much of that same like, hey, like getting out there and speaking to people and I guess scratching a lot of the itches you had from DevRel. What were the parts of DevRel that you really enjoyed that you tried to keep hold of now in like every like successive career?
I think the biggest parts to every DevRel thing is like one, community. Like how do you strike community?
Right.
Super important. I think that's the biggest ask from all the people in chat is like when you're thinking of like your developer job, whenever you're thinking of like the things that you're doing your day to day, like think about how are you building a community around yourself or how do you support the people that are a part of your community? And that's what I think DevRel does the best. And then the other part is like the education. Like how do I empower people to do the things that they want to be doing? And how do I also make sure to share what I know? Because I think those are the things that I learned the most out of DevRel.
Yeah. I'm now going to ask you like a horrible question, but for folks who are, so we've got some folks in the chat who are new to Hacktoberfest, and particularly if they're new to, I guess, the tech world in general, they may be hearing this word community a lot and have no idea what that actually means. Do you want to talk a little bit about like what community, I guess, is at the ground level as we need it?
That's a great question. And I think I love using the word because it is so general. For me, community is the people around you, the people that you want to work with, the people that you like talking to. They can be your friends, that can be your community. Sometimes that expands to be more people because you are all trying to do similar things. For instance, one community I'm a part of and now a moderator of is the Party Corgi community, which is like focused around supporting people creating content creation. We've evolved because we are multifaceted people. We do a lot of different things. And I think that is really fascinating to watch, right? Is like our community was focused around creating content, helping people create content.
On the screen. There we go.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so this is a beautiful transition into this. So yeah, focus on content and helping people create content. So that was like my introduction to Party Corgis in I guess like as we kicked off the stream, well, like you and me were chatting about doing this. And since joining the Discord, like, yeah, what you say about being multifaceted definitely rings true. I've learned so much just from lurking in there the last couple of weeks. So I have like a whole bunch of questions about this. I don't really know where to start.
I can talk. I can start talking, and you
go for it. Go for it.
Yeah.
Give me the run through.
Specifically, I think how community evolves, right, is like we start with thinking about like what is the core that brings us together. I think that's like ultimately what keeps everyone a part of the conversation, and people, might want to do other things. Initially, it starts with people, doing content creation, but community is so much more because it's also the people who keep you accountable for the things that you want to be doing. So if you want to grow in a certain way, I think that's really what community affords you is like one, there are people who are maybe further along in their journey, so you can learn from their wisdom. And there's some people that are, further behind in your journey, being relative, but like more so that you have the opportunity to educate them as well.
Right. And I put up the streamers page at the moment because I was like, you can kind of see from the website the like those routes of like, hey, here's the streamers on our network. But you can also kind of see that I guess like things haven't kept pace with how the community is growing because it still mentions streamers from Mixer. Rest in peace.
Yeah, this is the unfortunate part about this page. But like inside of the Discord, we have a streamer role, so that way we can always like highlight these are the people who are doing those streams.
Right. Awesome, cool. And so you said you became a moderator. So you weren't originally. What was that journey like? Was that just from participating a lot, or was that like a proactive effort?
I think that so I like joined back late last year, and I was actually very much a lurker, and I was transitioning from one other job to a new job, and my focus was really about like how do I make consistency with like the community that I want to, because if I'm like I live in New York City, and I want to be able to like have a community that's not just at New York City. I want a community that's across the world, because it's something I missed. So I ended up becoming more and more engaged into the community, and then also like exhibiting what the ethos of that community is which is, like I mentioned before, enabling and helping people to achieve what they want, and also like participating in building the content creation and whatnot.
Sure. So what are some of the ways that like people materially help each other in that community, if that makes sense?
Can you say that
material
again?
might not be the right word. Like, what are some of the ways that like, what are some of the forms of support that people within that community like get from one another?
That's a great question. I'm ruminating. I'm thinking.
Cool. In the meantime, hey Shreyas, thanks for joining us. Manish, if you're listening, we can definitely help you on the stream. We can answer your questions on the stream, but I know it's like stressful to ask questions with a chat that's scrolling by, and we're talking about other stuff in between. If you join the Hacktoberfest Discord, discord.gg/Hacktoberfest, that is a whole channel full of people who are talking about Hacktoberfest. We're in there. I'm in there. A bunch of people in the chat are in there. We'll be able to answer your questions like on a much longer time span than just this stream. So jump in there, ask any questions you have in the meantime. But after the show, we'll jump in the Discord together with you, and we'll get you going on some projects. Cool.
As far as to your question about like what are the material ways, I think like for instance, it's a space for like sharing your work, and just like the worst Dev mentions is like the celebrating successes is a big deal. I think that's like something that is is people like don't realize is like really important. Is like you want somebody to tell like you want to tell people like I did this thing, like I'm like I feel accomplished. And I think
there's
a lot of
celebrating wins channel just for that,
and it's not just like, oh, we like finished this project. It's like, sometimes it comes down to like, I did a workout, I achieved the goals I set out. We also have like a channel around goals, so like if you want to feel accountable to the goals that you putting to yourself, I think that's really important. But I was
looking for a resource for this, which is Lara Hogan's Donut Manifesto, which is, for those who aren't familiar, Lara Hogan was the VP of engineering at Etsy and Kickstarter, and now she does management she does training for engineering managers. But she has this wonderful, what she calls the Donut Manifesto, which is about celebrating wins with pastries. So like, you should always know the people on your team, their favorite pastries. So when something great happens, you can just go buy them that pastry and celebrate their win. And the page is just like full of pictures of donuts that Lara has bought to celebrate her own wins. And actually, now I'm looking at this, she needs to get a cholesterol check. There's a lot of donuts. But yeah, I said, like, as you're saying, the Corgi Party Network has a Celebrating Wins channel. Party Corgi Network has a Celebrating Wins channel, which is just such a wonderful, joyful place to hang.
Yeah, but I think like in the same ways that Kurt has just mentioned, it's like how to write your blog post, how to be consistent, how to build that writing habit, how to build that that content creation habit, which I think is super important, because it doesn't. I think a lot of people are like, content creation is like, I build a blog post. It's like, it's so much more than that, right? It's like, it's also like, how do you do other kind of forms? Do you record videos? Do you do Twitch streaming? Do you do other ways? And I think that this is an opportunity to like really have conversations around that act and that practice, because that's important.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit because it's really interesting. And I think it's one of the things, and I imagine it's something that you get exposed to a lot as someone who's like on the forefront of, educating people, or in previous roles, I've been like on the forefront of educating developers, that there's like, I don't want to call them lies, but there's like some narratives that the industry like tells as like paths to success, that like, hey, if you're like a beginning engineer and you do these things, you'll like make it. And like one of those is, like, hey, do open source. And like open source is great and really helpful for people's career, but like it's far from like the instant solution people say, right? And like, making content is another one of those. And so I'm really interested in like, it's exactly like the problem of that is exactly as you say, right? Like it's not enough just throwing a blog on like a regular blog on the internet and they will come and you'll be like, you'll have a massive personal brand overnight. There's like other parts of that process that are super important. So you mentioned like a couple of those. Like, what do you think are the biggest, I guess, like biggest pitfalls, or the ways that people, the usual ways you see people in that channel kind of like responding to like, hey, you should also do this as well as what you're doing, or add this to your practice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
What I'm trying to think of is like the common pitfalls I think I see people go through, and like the like the ways to remediate that, I guess, is like most people are just, they write the blog post one time and then they're done. And like they're like, oh, I want to be able to do this more. And a big part of it, unfortunately, is like to write consistently, you have to write consistently. And I think that's really where it manifests itself most, is most of the time when you're trying to do a certain task, you have to do it several times, and you have to make sure that your motivation is correct. I think that's the other part, which is really hard, because if you directly use only your motivation, like that's a depleted resource. Like it will eventually go away. And so you have to build that practice, because it makes it easier over time. So that way you do it. I think the other thing is deeply investing into something that you don't necessarily know if you like or enjoy. So like spending X number of dollars on a thing that you may not enjoy may not be a good
stream
thing.
Equipment.
but it's also valid. And I think there's nothing wrong with like learning that, but it's like important to recognize that manifests itself in other ways beyond just like the specific act. And acknowledging it allows you to be able to say like, cool, I want to practice doing this thing. And I think like, if you have like a Twitch stream, you don't even have to have a camera. You just need an audio, really. And like at the end of the day, people are here to see you. And I think like those are the ways that you can start slow, because then it doesn't feel as such high risk for you. And I think that's the part that even is true with writing content, is like it feels like a high risk. I put some content out and then I'm like, cool, like no one's responded, but like that's the point, is like you're kind of like writing to yourself, if you think about it, is like you're writing about the knowledge that you want to have later on. And that's kind of how I treat it as well, is like that way it supports people. Most of the content I've written that ends up being the most popular is things that are like, oh, I just did this because I was like, this is something I needed, I wish I had. And other people were like, oh my God, I really love this. This is super helpful. There's like a blog post I wrote about like line highlighting, like highlighting a line in a code block. And a lot of people really love this blog post. In fact, like a surprise one day, I like learned that it's used in like JetBrains documentation now. And I'm like, wow, that's like an impressive thing.
Nice. That's super cool. And yeah, I think that also helps a lot towards what you said about motivation, right? Like if you're coming at it with like a very specific goal of like, hey, I'll blog this much to achieve this like end result, rather than blogging about things you're interested in, it's like all extrinsic motivation, which is like very easily depleted. There was something I was going to say, I need help from the chat. There's a blog post I was looking for about a topic related to this, and like the whole concept was like, your blog should be a garden. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know the post I'm talking about? And I cannot find it.
Of Joel Hook's blog post?
Possibly.
We're gonna grab.
Sorry, we're going to this eventually. Anyway, the reason I want to talk about this blog post is because it's very relevant to that. Yes, my blog is a digital garden. Perfect. Thank you, Pritz. You're the best.
You're welcome.
This is perfect, and exactly what we're talking about. Like, hey, it's like the whole concept of this post is like, blogging not necessarily for other people or for like, other people to read it, but for like, you know, cultivating your own little area where you want to you build up your own knowledge and you talk about the things that are interested in you, and like it will grow and go somewhere from that. My video is laggy. Oh, I will tell you why my video is laggy. Thank you, that copy.
Is your computer not plugged in?
No, I forgot to start my undervolt. So I run my streaming machine. It's a Razer Blade, which sounds like a great idea. Wonderful laptop. Looks really cool. Made by Razer. Great developer of hardware devices. Absolute garbage. Never buy one. I'm running right now Chrome and OBS. All I'm running, and all the OBS is doing is my green screen. And I have to undervolt my laptop in order for it not to hit 100 degrees Celsius and thermal throttle. So what you're seeing with my camera is my laptop thermal throttling. So that will calm down in a minute. I've just turned on the undervolt and the temperature is slowly going down. As soon as that calms down, my video will stop lagging. Thank you, that copy. I missed doing that this morning. Anyway, yes, this is Digital Garden, super great blog post. I posted it in the chat. Thank you, Prince, for helping me find that.
Of course.
Now we've gone a mile off track.
I can talk through the idea. I think this also was like very critical to like how we treat content creation, specifically some of the people inside of the Party Corgi. And I think that's like an important note, right? Is that the idea of the Digital Garden isn't that like content is discreetly produced and then like marketed out there in the world. I think that's something I learned through the Party Corgi network. It's like you can write something and not like you can write it, put it onto the internet and not market it. Like those are three discrete things that exist that a lot of the time feel like one whole thing. So the idea of like, I can write my thing, I can put it onto the internet. It doesn't have to even be complete, but it can still exist because sharing knowledge is important. And I think the Digital Garden shows like one, content is ever growing. It can be updating, and exactly to the point, Kurt, it's like the publishing versus promoting. Like I can put things out there, but it doesn't have to be promoted. And I can promote things that are not finished as well. I think that's like where the mentality around like performative blogging sometimes can weigh us down. It's like we feel like everything has to be perfect, but because of that perfection, it stops us from being able to produce the things that we need to.
Right. And it's such an important differentiation because like for any like early stage developer, that most of their window into blogging is going to be, you know, from like the blogging driven by the industry, which is often blogging for content marketing, which like absolutely makes no separation between those publish and promote things. It's like they're one and the same. So yeah, it's a really, really important distinction to highlight. That's super awesome. So that's one aspect of the Party Corgi, is like helping people kind of develop these practices and like get into that routine and be comfortable with that and have a place to celebrate those wins. For folks who like are starting out on this journey and are wondering if like, and are liking the sounds of someone if it's for them, how would you recommend they get started with becoming part of the Party Corgi network?
We're an open community, so you're more than welcome to always be joining. I can get us the link real quick. It's at discord.gg/partycorgi because we're at that time now where we can just get things.
I've dropped it in chat.
Perfect. But as far as like getting involved and being a part of the community, we have plenty of people who just like kind of sit and stay in the background where they like want to like learn how everything's going. But if you want to actively start like conversing and talking through with people, like it's totally fine. We have separate channels for different conversations. So like we have a channel for content creation. We have a channel for like Jamstack and serverless conversations. For gardening. We do actually, now that I think about it,
I spend a lot of time in that channel.
We have topics around like baking and cooking. We have topics about like mobility and exercising, power endurance, all these kind of different dimensions of like us as people, because like at the beginning, we're people before we're content creators, no matter what. And those dimensions are also important because I think Ben Lannon BR had mentioned inside of the chat is that we don't also just do content creation around like our technical stuff. We also talk about like music production. We talk about like things that make us happy. And like those are parts of the journey that you can write about as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. There's something I was going to say on that. I completely forgot what it was. Oh yeah, where did the name come from?
So the name is inspired by the image that supports it, which is the is the corgi that is like in the same theme as the party parrot. I think that's like where it comes from as far as the name, but no one has been able to find where does the party corgi symbol, like where does it come from? And we, each time we do like a stream and somebody asks is like, if you happen to know who like created this, please let us know.
You need
we need like
the person, the party parrot website, like that explains the origin of the party parrot. You need like the origin of the party corgi.
Yes. Because like that's kind of where we're at, because there's like a few different symbols that exist all over the internet, but like nothing that says like this is where like, it came from.
Yeah. Where is the what is the etymology of an emoji? Very cool. Okay, so where were we up to with your career? So we were talking about we went from DevRel into community. So you were your first job out of college was doing DevRel, which is like unusual in terms of the availability of that role, but introduced you to this wonderful world of community. Where then from there?
The next step was into teaching at a boot camp. Cool. And the biggest reason was I was like very into the education part. So like I mentioned before, like that's like where I thrive. I wanted to support people getting their start into their journey. And I think that's like really where I saw myself is. And that's like another practice of like, I want to create content that supports people wanting to learn. And I got to learn a lot of things because I learned one, there's a whole school around teaching people. Like that's a thing, which I didn't know about. Yeah.
And no one in DevRel has ever heard of it.
There's a whole thing about it, and I was like, this is amazing. It also kind of like really put my perspective as far as like, how do I make sure when I articulate things and articulate thoughts, even if it's like technology related, how do I make sure to meet the listener versus like me meeting talking at the level I need to be.
Right. Well, there's some like core like principles that you think are easily transferable or applicable, if that makes sense. Like, is there like some top pedagogical hits that you would like share with people?
For transferable from which end? From the DevRel stuff or from pedagogy to engineering? Because I have lots for either.
From pedagogy to engineering.
Oh my god, so many. Cool. I think like the most important thing from pedagogy is this concept of knowledge versus skills.
Okay.
That's like the very first thing is like some things that are absolute truths. Right. Like knowledge things that you can like learn, and they are truths that exist and they are there. Whereas skills are things that build over time by doing them. And I think a lot of the time we think that knowledge is innate. We are like given this knowledge, we have that knowledge, like we're able to do the thing. But in most things that we do with technology, they're actually really acquired skills. So you have to like be able to learn it, do it.
Do you have an example of like something that is like an acquired skill in technology that's often misconstrued as knowledge? Besides that, I guess programming itself.
I actually think that's like I mean, like ironically, that's most of the time people are like, oh, you're so talented, you're so good at this thing, you're just innately smart. And I think like that like undermines a lot of people's works into the fact that like, some people worked really hard. Like when I started in university, I almost failed my first class. I was not good at programming when I started. And to this day, I still have to like get better. Like I still have to learn and practice these things. And I think normalizing that behavior makes it feel accessible for anybody, which is ultimately why, like the other thing is like, you have to be really good at math in order to be a good programmer, which is not true. There are plenty of people who are not good at math. There are plenty of people who are good at math. Some people who are just average at math, and we're all programmers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the blogging is actually another example of that. Like the whole idea of building up a practice is precisely that, right? It's like developing the skill, and it's not just, hey, you're a natural born writer. And like we had Erica Heidi on, technical writer at DigitalOcean last week. Time has ceased to have meaning. One of the things she said was like, hey, she has days where like she gets up to write a piece and just like absolutely cannot get a start on that piece. And that's just like a natural part of writing. And the only way to work through that is to like have that habit where you just continually bump your head onto that until the day comes when that's not the problem. And so very, very cool point. So that was one point. Did you have any others that were salient?
I think the other things that really come to mind is like the way that we communicate. And I think that isn't necessarily, I don't know if that's like pedagogy itself, but like, I think a lot around like being an engineer, you aren't just talking to engineers who work in the same platform as you. You might be a web developer and you might speak, daily to web developers, but you have to meet your audience where they are. So you have to talk about technical constraints to different people at different skill levels, at different knowledge levels, at different careers in general. And like that is a pedagogical skill where you have to articulate what's the right conversation to have here, and like what are the things to raise and how, which don't seem like it, but like those are techniques from learning and that you have to be able to acquire, which you do it because you've seen it so much. So like most people are like unconsciously doing it all the time, and you're like, I didn't know that was a thing. The other thing this one was important. Learning. No, learning in general is a pedagogical skill. How do you teach yourself to learn? Which we don't realize that is like a hard
and
skill.
You're never actually taught that explicitly. You're taught that through the process of like, how the education system like does things. But it's very rare to run into that wholesale.
Which is like completely shifted my mindset. I think a lot about like fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets. Fixed mindsets are around this concept of like, I will only ever be able to achieve this much. Like it will never get higher. This is where I am, versus a growth mindset, which kind of takes that concept and says, no, I might not be good at it here, but I can still get better at that thing. And here's how I can do that. And I think that's like an important mindset that also pops up in pedagogy, because we learn that like, if you come in with this fixed mindset, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will only achieve that much. Whereas the growth mindset does set you up for the success of, one, growth doesn't have to mean that you're always successful, but that you can find success in anything.
Interesting. And so I imagine that especially is something that you encounter during your time at bootcamp a lot, just purely based on, sorry, when I say that, I mean the differing levels of people's like journey in learning how to learn must have been there must have been a really wide range of that, just because like the wide range of people who come into background. Like if you're like a teacher in the K-12 system, given like a given class intake, roughly what stage they are in that development, because that's how the whole system is arranged, right? Like, that, hey, my year for these 8-year-olds, like that's how much learning to learn they've done. Whereas like, I imagine that must have been super difficult in a boot camp. And then given the short times, like how did you help? Like if someone came in at either end of those extremes, like how did you find a place in between where your material could address each of those audiences?
I think a lot of around one is like, how do I keep resources for like giving people support to learning something more often? Sometimes people need to see things more often in order to learn, especially variety of content. Misconception. People think that they're a certain type of learner, like you are an auditory learner or a visual learner or those things. That's not a thing. You're not this type of learner. You actually learn the best by doing different types of learning experiences. And that's another reason to why, like as a teacher, is thinking about like, how do I meet all the different types of modalities that people can have, so that way they're exposed to it in different perspectives.
This is just a total tangent, but like when I found out that wasn't true, it was like one of the instances where like I've been angriest in my life, because I remember joining my secondary school, the first like week of secondary school, and our secondary school induction, so high school for folks who aren't from the UK. We had to like the actual school had us do like a test where it told us what type of learner we are, and then like that was like, okay, cool, like I'm coming to high school and my school has just told me that I learn best through bullet pointed lists. I guess that's how I study for the next 10 years. And then coming out of that, they'd be like, hey, by the way, you were lied to. Just like, oh.
Well, and the system isn't perfect, right? Like, I think that's like an important thing about learning theory too, is like learning theory is a theory at itself.
Evolving science.
It evolves. It's like different, but like those sorts of conceptions we take to heart, we like fully believe them. And that we only do those things, like, but like that's not a truth that we have to live by. The other thing, as far as like, how do I support people in like the bootcamp area, is also giving like the support with regards to like acknowledging that like everyone learns at a different pace. Like a lot of people are like, I see this person who's moving very fast and I'm not that fast. Why am I not that fast? And like, you all learn something different at different times. There are some people who, you know, they just like finished university or they finished high school. And like, so they're like very fresh from like learning. So they have like still been on that course. Whereas some people have stopped.
If you're doing that career change and you've been in industry for 20 years doing something completely irrelevant, like,
and some people have different types of careers. So some people may be coming from chemistry. Some people might be coming from an office job. Some people come from different types of professions altogether, which are not office jobs at all. And so like, you have to like take what you know and translate that. But that is in itself is such a gift as well, because you're not burdened by the perspective of a lot of people who go through university experience or go through like the traditional educational experience where they're like, oh, well,
this is the way of doing things.
This is the only way of doing things. And that my worldview is the only worldview.
You know, my favorite example of this, which I tell people all the time now, like it's 2020, everything is machine learning, right? Like when I went through university, and this was only the year I had this class would have only been 2014, maybe 2015. This is like a pure, like, it's such a great example of like embedded knowledge in institutions that isn't necessarily up to date. But like my AI teacher in university told me that neural networks are dead. They were something that was ruled to be like non-viable in like the 80s, and like they would never, like we'd reached the peak of neural networks and that was it. And like I was being taught this in a class of like 200 people in 2015, whereas like if you're not, and that's because that whole researcher's career, very valid, they'd done that work, and at the time that was true, and so like that was true and fact to them. But like outside of that environment where like that isn't the case, that assumption is never being challenged. Like that assumption is like being challenged, right? That's fascinating.
Sorry for everyone who's like in the chat and is like, that was like,
honestly,
why is Prince laughing? Is like, my first job was working at a neural net company.
And so like and not far from this time either, right? Like 2015 it's dead to like 2016. Oh, by the way, whole startup founded on this. Like
like most technologies are still being put together with this, and like that's so funny to hear.
Absolutely, it was like literally the entire curriculum for that AI course was like building up to why neural networks weren't a viable approach to AI. It's just like, so comical to look back on.
Love it.
Wonderful university. Love it a lot. Anyway, back on to boot camps.
We can go to boot camps, and then we can transition to where we are today. I think one thing that I want to make sure that also say to people is that learning paths are not like, they're not one right way. I went to university. I taught people at boot camp.
Yeah.
Honestly, there are a lot of people who I worked with at a boot camp. I'm like, you're so smart. And the people who I went to university with, I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. So like, it doesn't matter which side of this coin or any side of coins that you come from, because there are people who learn it by themselves as well, or they're learning with a community of people. Like there's no right way of doing, but there are good practices. And I think a boot camp teaches you how to learn, whereas university, you're expected to know how to learn. Those are things that are like important skill sets. And at the end of the day, we all work with people who work who came into the field in different ways. Like I came from university. Most of the people I work with day to day come from boot camp. Some of them are self-learned.
A ton of guests on the show, like Layla at Twilio, for example, who came from she was doing horse riding, made a Pilates studio, and then learned to code because she wanted to build a booking website for her Pilates studio, and that's how she became a developer. Like all kinds of routes.
Yeah, as that as well. The worst dev. Like you are like an example of people who you come from a completely different set of like experiences, and like that in itself, I just think that speaks to the validity of like learning happens at any point in time, and I think it just speaks to the fact of why the career can and shouldn't be accessible for folk.
Yeah, for sure. And there's like, I think on that notion that there's no one true path, I think it's now there's like wider recognition of that in the industry. I think like so many companies now have like a learning and development budget, and like will be like, hey, you wanted to study a master's alongside your degree, alongside your job, go do that. Or you want to take a little bit of time off to do a boot camp, or you want to just buy an EdCamp subscription and go as like learn as you go. So it's like a really good time to to have that recognition that like, hey, there's some things I want to learn, and it's perfectly valid for me to find a form of schooling that addresses that. So the next question I had that I was going to ask you, like for folks who are entering boot camps now, because we talk a lot to career changes on this show, like what tips would you have for them in entering that? But I think you just did that. So is there anything else you want to add to that? Or is that cool?
Yes.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah.
Write down everything that you're learning. Remember how I was talking about content creation is a written practice? The bootcamp that I worked for, we made sure people would write. And more, now that I think about it, I really want people to feel like they can write for the sake of themselves. Because a common theme that I heard people with graduating is like, oh, I forgot how to do this. I'm like, if you write it down, one, even if you forget it, you have a written copy of it. But writing it down strengthens the neural processes in your brain to make sure that you remember it in long term. And so like that's such an important step. Please do that. It's so important. And it gets you like the benefit of like saying, I know what I'm talking about in terms of content. And you can like show people like later on, I was like, hey, you don't know this thing. Here's the thing I wrote.
Yeah. I just posted a link to one of my favorite articles, which is Writing is Thinking by Sally Kerrigan. So where I was going to bring this is like, the other reason that's a really important and useful skill is like right now in this, like, hey, everyone's remote and we're increasingly working with people in different time zones. Like we can't necessarily always rely on being able to be in a physical proximity and talking face to face to communicate our ideas. And so in the tech industry right now, especially entering in, being at a certain level of comfort with like putting your ideas down in paper is actually a like saleable skill in itself. Like if you can do that, like you'll find success with getting remote and asynchronous work a little bit easier.
And documentation for like, there's like so much benefit. Like there's so many benefits that come from learning how to write. As a person who's not good at writing, but only through like the practice of writing makes it happen, is a skill I wish I exercised more of. I used to like avoid writing at all costs back in like school, and I was like, gosh, I wish I was better at this. And I can be because it's a skill, not a talent.
Yeah, I think I had the opposite thing where I guess this is such a product of the English school system where like I used long words and therefore got good grades and therefore never had to be intentional at all about getting better at writing. And that wasn't a problem until someone told me that actually that's not how to communicate to humans. And now I'm like, oh, good, I don't know how to write. And it's like, terrible. So perfect. So from there, so you worked at the bootcamp and you were teaching, and now there's been a transition back to practicing what you taught and being a software engineer again at some point, but still being involved in the education. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So like for me personally, I knew that I still wanted to be a part of education. Technology, education technology is another dimension of doing the same work I've been doing, where now I get to use my skills to help people in like the school system. And I think there's like a lot of validity in helping support the education of like knowledge, like how do you accrue knowledge? Why I like my specific job is like, there's like this example that we always bring up is like a textbook, and it brings up the fact like, hey, you can insert the CD-ROM so that way you can like learn about this. Or the primary mode of communication that we use is email. And I'm like, that speaks to how like by the time a printed book gets to you, it's already out of date by the time you've received it. And sometimes these printed books, you know, they sit in a closet somewhere and they get stuck there. But like a platform that's supporting educational technology that affords us the ability to like have like up-to-date live news and like live conversations. For instance, like in the US, we had a congressperson, one of our government people, be able to do Twitch stream, and we were able to write an article about that event. And that in itself shows like how unique an experience that is. And like things that we found is like kids really love to read about video games. Like there's like a video game called Fortnite, and people really love reading Fortnite articles. Teachers also love finding ways to engage directly with their students. And sometimes that might be like things that they're directly facing or having conversations about, you know, in the day to day. And I think that's like really important for us to build tools that for those conversations, and it can look all different types of ways.
Yeah, and that on like engaging audience, things they enjoy. That stream's a prime example, because the whole point in that stream was like, hey, if you can, go register to vote, right? Which obviously is not relevant to kids, but is a lasting message, you would hope.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing in terms of like impact, right? Like it might do something today, but it also has dramatic impact to how people see that system entirely for their life.
Yeah, for sure. So to bring us back to a question we had earlier, which we can now talk about, because we are at the present time. What's the most rewarding part of your job, if you could find any one thing that stands out? I think you told Libby.
Yes, that was me trying to answer that question. Is that that's my
backwards.
My rewarding feeling is like being able to support students, especially in this. It was not like a direct reason to why I chose this position, but I'm very thankful to be working on a piece of technology that can enable people to have those conversations and also still afford education. When everything happened with COVID, we had to onboard a lot of folk because a lot of schools needed to figure out, how do we like still do teaching? Like, what does that look like? And we provide content around like social and emotional learning, which is like, how do you like respond to these sorts of events that are happening around you? And like, how do you, like, what does that mean for me as the individual student? And then also like how to have that as a conversation with teachers. Yeah,
I think we could all do with some help in processing what's happening around us right now. I wanted to talk a little bit about the personal, I guess, like responsibilities transition here, because like going from like, DevRel to like teacher to software engineer again, was there like anything in particular that drove you back towards like actually like writing the code day to day as opposed to like talking about and teaching it?
I think nothing in particular. I think mostly it's just like I really like the idea of a product. And I think that was kind of the driving factor. It's nothing like, a problem with any of the other things that I was doing. It's more so like, I think this is just like where it's evolving. And that's and that's something I wanted to mention as well. Is like, your career is not like a linear progression. It doesn't have to be like you have to get your first engineering job and that you're only that, or you get your first job in like maybe QA testing and that's all you ever do. And I think that is something that I was given, like that bias was something I was given, is like, you can only ever do this. But like there are transferable skills in any career that you have. So you're able to do that. It does require work, but like those are the things that I hope to remind folk of.
Yeah, I think tech especially is very bad at sketching out those, like the career path where traditionally shown is like, hey, you'll be a software engineer or a manager of software engineers, and that is what you will do. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Todd asked, and this is like relevant to your day today, and we need more princes in tech. Strong endorsement of this message.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, Todd asked, are there any challenges you've come across with everyone working from home this year?
A lot. I'm fortunate that my company was already doing a partial remote. We already had full-time remote employees, but we also had like a remote policy for our in-office people where they could work from home X amount of time in a year. But I think the biggest challenges is communication, which goes back to why writing is important. Writing things down makes sure that everyone, even the people who aren't in a meeting or Zoom call together, have the information. And that is such an... I don't know why people don't realize that is such an
empowering thing is what it is. Like, it's like my favorite, whenever I talk about GitHub, it's just like purely like, hey, I have all the context for every decision ever made written down. And so if I need to make a decision, I don't have to ask permission as much because I can see how these things happened and like base my decisions on that. It's like it breaks barriers completely.
It also affords us the opportunity to have conversations and comments after the fact. I think like a lot of times when you're in a meeting, you feel like you have to make a decision right then and there, but you don't have to do that. You don't have, those aren't things that you need to do.
And they're not environments that one excels in making, hard decisions in. And like, arguably, if we didn't all make decisions in the heat of a moment in a meeting, we might make better ones.
And like, there might be context that we're just missing. Like, and we don't know how to capture that. If we don't write it down, like, how can you capture the missing context? And I think that's why it goes back to like why writing is so important.
For sure. Awesome. Cool. I hope that answers your question, Todd.
Yeah. So. The other thing that was a challenge was the actual work itself. Onboarding, we onboarded like double the user count that we already had
right
onto our platform.
That's
so
because
like
of that switch to like, hey, newsletter is now a very relevant product, right?
yes,
Not that it wasn't before. Yeah.
and that in itself is a technical challenge that
Yeah.
we are fortunate to be able to solve. And I just like, even though my team isn't here to like hear it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give them a major shout out. Our SRE team is DevOps team is amazing. They handled so much, like a flip of a switch, like things that were working in like a week's time.
That's awesome. Super cool. So does now sound like a good time to go from talking about your support of our people's learning journeys to a recent learning journey of your own?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So yeah, I guess the context for this is like, I have observed that Prince has been learning Rust and has been talking a lot about learning Rust, and there's someone who has tried to learn Rust and has not yet made much headway. I was very interested in hearing about this journey, and particularly like as I guess we've kind of gone through, like your sharing of this journey in the minute as it's happening. So I guess I want to start with like why Rust? Like where did this journey come from?
A big thing I was doing for this year was I like every year I set out goals, and I usually break them out not as like necessarily like New Year's resolutions, but more so like these are the things that I hope to accomplish. And I do them very like discrete units. So like one of my goals is like learn a new programming language and try to build a project with it.
Sure.
Which at the time I thought it was going to be Python. So I wrote it in my my book of things, like write stuff about Python. And then I was like, I hate writing Python. It's also like a language I like using at work, but like I didn't want to make my like reward, my
personal
goals
goal linked to it.
That's exactly it. My personal goal linked to something professionally that I'm trying to do here. And that's what drove me to learning about Rust. Something that I really wanted to do is like still learn a language, but like be able to build with technologies that I don't normally use day to day. And that's kind of what led down that path.
Awesome. Super cool. So this is a question we'll get into now because, I guess it makes sense now. So Todd asked, I'm learning Rust, and what would you say someone like me who is running up against challenges whilst learning? So we can use that as a good segue into actually starting out that journey. What are some challenges you faced initially starting this project, moving towards this goal?
Some big things is like, what are the things you can do with it? Is like a big challenge I didn't know at the time. Anytime for me, I like started with going through the Rust programming language book. The Rust programming language book is broken down into chapters, and it has like examples. And what I would do is be able to like write down questions that I have along the way. I just want to say, hi, the worst dev. I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out and chat with us. You're amazing. So as far as like the learning journey for me and like how to handle challenges is really writing them down. And then sometimes that might be like sitting with it and like reviewing and trying to like dissect parts and say like, why does it work this way? Can I get an answer to that? And also finding out maybe if my community of people, another reason why like important to have community is like finding out who are the people I can ask this to. So like in Party Corgi, I would start asking people who I know Rust or going into the Rust programming language or the Rust community discords and being like, hey, this is a thing. I don't know. Can someone explain how this works? And I think it works this way, or like kind of asking those kind of leading questions. I would also, me personally, I did this live on Twitch when I was like going through the book, which is another dimension of like complexity into it, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn this thing and I'm going to learn it very openly, which is really hard. It's emotionally hard.
Terrifying.
Almost terrifying. But like I said it to myself as this is an easy way for me to break into streaming because one, I'm setting out here like but baseline. I'm learning a thing. I'm learning it very openly. So like you can't even say like I don't know what I'm doing, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's literally it. But I wanted to make sure to capture that openly because I wanted it to be clear that like, everyone struggles with learning something. Like it's very, very real. What I would do is I would just write down the things I'm learning. Maybe it's even copying down sentences that I'm seeing inside of the Rust programming language book and say like, does this make sense? are there questions that I have about this? Is there syntactical things I need to be remembering? A big thing is like taking what I learn and then putting it into something so I can like practice that whole like process, and see like where do I get stuck on?
Yeah. And so like when you say like putting them in something, you mean like making a project with it or like using it in practice, which I guess also is where we come kind of full loop in that like part of the place where you applied this was in like, you know, tools for the Party Corgi network and the community, which I guess gives you the benefits of that community and having that support network, like you publicly point people to it. And it also kind of becomes like something you're giving back to the community and also something that people on a similar journey can contribute to.
Yes, exactly. And I think that like I started off really small with like just following the book. They have in the book, they have sections that are specifically around projects. There's like 3 chapters that are project-based chapters. And what I would do is I would really like pay attention to these parts and be like, okay, how did they set up the organization here? What were some of the things that they were thinking about? I think that goes back to why writing is super critical. Because sometimes when we write in a way that says, do this, do that, then this, which is like recipe based. But like what it doesn't afford you is the ability to give you context of why to do that thing. And like that's where like writing that knowledge down and writing out those actions helps solidify why you're doing a thing. And it also can tell people like, why did you do that thing? And here's an alternative and like why it might serve you better.
Yeah. It allows them to ask, like, as you're saying, like ask questions about why this works. It gives them hooks to ask those questions rather than just blindly following. Because that's also like something I find I struggle with a lot with technology tutorials is it's so easy to passively consume them and just mindlessly follow the steps and realize after about 4 hours that like, oh, I don't actually know any of what I just did. I just did it and typed it in the terminal and now it's done. So yeah, like the writing affords you the opportunity to have that internal questioning. Chris George says, simply do this. Yes, the amount of tutorials you simply obviously do something.
Tips about writing. Technical writing. Don't use the word simply. Don't use the word basic. Like you don't need to use those words. They are not necessary. They make the people who are reading it think, wow, I don't get this. So therefore I must not be able to do this. And like you should write it yourself because it isn't simple.
Right.
Like programming is not quote unquote simple by any means.
It's arcane symbols thrown into a machine that we hope they understand.
That's a great question, that copy, as far as like, did you do the wrestling exercises? So there's a project called Wrestlings under, thought I had it.
I've got it.
Perfect. I did also do the wrestling exercises. So if you're a person who doesn't like to read a book, which very valid if you don't want to like read a whole programming book.
Books are expensive as well. I mean, the Rust book's not because it's open source, but in general, books are expensive.
Yeah, books are expensive. This book is free, but this is an alternative way of also learning the exercises in a way, or learning the information in exercise mode. So you're doing it more practically in terms of like I'm having to hands-on solve these problems. I think that's a super awesome way of going about it as well. Yeah. If you're like, I want more exercising building, it's helpful. One thing that the wrestling's exercises didn't afford me was the ability of knowing why I had to do something. And that's the reason why I wanted to go buy the book. It's easy to be like, cool, solve the test case, but don't necessarily understand why that's the solution or what are the alternatives. And that means you explore it a little bit more. But I like the kind of like knowledge that the book directly gave me. So I know like, here's the intuition I need to build. Like you mentioned before, the hooks that I need to have.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of like something that Katrina Owens, who makes Exorcism. So Exorcism is
Exorcism is another great utility use for learning stuff, because they have mentors around like, how do you learn something? Here's feedback on your solution, which I think goes back to the whole community that will help you learn how to do a thing. Feedback is critical to getting better at something. Like you can do many reps of like writing, but like if you want to get stronger as well, you might need more deliberate like noting of like, what am I missing?
Right. And so like, I don't know how much this is true of Exorcism now, because it's had a lot of rework since, but the original thing behind Exorcism was like getting up and going on another programming language quickly. And that's why the mentor loop was in there, because it was like meant to be feedback directed at like, hey, am I writing this in the way that is like idiomatic for that language? So like, if you're talking about Python, are you writing it like in Pythonically, that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
And so this is one of the things that like I'm hearing and kind of like what you're saying about the rustings exercises as well, is that like it's a really quick way to like, if you're already very well versed in at least one programming language and what you're really looking for is like, hey, just tell me the syntax and like get me going on the syntax and like some of the like the primitives in this language. And you're not necessarily looking as much to like look under the hood and understand, you know, like some other computing concepts, or like you're not as interested in learning about the things that Rust does differently. You just want to be able to write this thing in anger. Stuff like Rustlings is a really great place to start.
Yeah. And some people are like better at picking up language things. Right. When you've like learned a bunch of languages, your brain processes them slightly different than people who may be learning this for the first time, or it might be their second language. There's sometimes like, I think people always say is like, once you've learned your first language, like everything gets a little bit easier. And there is some truth to that, because like you're not dealing with having to learn how does programming work? Like how does the computer understand what I'm doing? How do all these things translate? Whereas like now you're getting to talk about like, how does this language do this particular task instead?
Right. Yeah. So you understand, you have like an intuition for like how the model of computing and how it expects to respond to and how it behaves in certain circumstances. Super cool. So I guess to round this section off, one question I had for you, that like trying not to get into like language wars and tribalism, but I think it's particularly relevant to the Rust community. Is there anything that you think Rust and the Rust community does that is like beneficial to learners that like we could learn from in other technologies? Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, it does. Cool. I think for me, one thing that I've been absolutely blown away by is like the transparency around like how things are built, or like why does the language grow this way? So like Rust by default is very transparent as far as like this is where the language is going. No, there's no like one arbiter who determines like this is the way that wrestling is going. And I think that like really shows the fact that if you wanted to get involved with how the direction of that language goes, you can actually do that. Like your involvement to those things. Yes, you can open an RFC. You can read past RFCs to understand why was something built a certain way. And that's a really awesome way to like learn how like programming languages work and why certain things exist a certain way. Because then that helps you think about how do you build a new tool with this language, which that's like a level up in like your journey is like once you start like learning a thing, learning how it's built tends to show you like, oh, this is like when I need to build something, I could take this as an example to understanding how I can architect or why certain decisions have to be made to do a certain thing, which I didn't realize starting off. I didn't even learn this till really I was building tools. Like it really, it's like kind of a recent realization, honestly, is like, there's so much value in seeing that. And a lot of times we say like, go contribute to open source. Like this is how you'll learn. But like, it doesn't translate to how it happens. It just says it will happen. This is like, I think a direct example of how that can happen is you can learn the skills of writing things down, of the decisions in, if you're building a new open source thing or you're contributing to an open source thing, you can afford that conversation really well.
It's like the difference between, you know, like following a tutorial or like doing exercise from lecturers is like, hey, open source is like, you contribute to open source, you're not just like doing that activity, you're participating in a system of software creation with like a group of people who have processes and have thoughts around how the tools we use should be made. Super cool. Awesome. So that was the end of my questions. I think we've answered the audience ones. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us or say before we end this stream?
My big things as far as like things I want to leave you all with is I hope that you all continue to cultivate the community that's around you. I think that don't take it for granted in terms of like what you can get from it. Remember that community is not transactional necessarily. You can be sure to be able to give and receive things, because that's what makes a healthy community. You are in control of how the community shapes up, even if you're not a community leader. But by contributing, you become a community leader. You represent that community.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. When are you next streaming?
I think the next stream I thought I was going to do today. So normally I stream on Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. ET, but I don't know what time that is in UTC or
11:30. No, in UTC 10:30. That'd be 10:30 p.m.
Okay. The other thing is today I'm definitely not going to do that because I already did a stream, so we're already done.
Nice, cool. Achievement done for the day. So I guess it'll be next Tuesday or Thursday.
And I have
Awesome, cool.
it on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/MaxLW. So you can see the time block. So if that works for you, it should auto adjust for you. I hope to see you there. I'll be doing Rust stuff. That's like kind of my thing right now. And like I challenge you all to like when you're learning your thing, learn it openly, write about it into your social channels, like write about it and anything. You don't have to even publish the things that you're learning, but I encourage you to write down the things that you have questions about, write down the things that you're learning over the course of time, because like those are the things that are going to help you in your journey, not in just the moment here right now, but from the long term. And like you're going to thank your past self for it.
For sure. And I was about to post the URL and then completely forgot it. Party Corgi, there we go. Yes, cool. Yes, and if you, speaking of that, like, hey, learn openly, if you want to join a wonderful community that will help you do that, you can go to Party Corgi. And of course, that is also a great place to follow up with you and ask you any questions, I imagine, as well.
And if you end up writing any posts, you can feel free to like at me on Twitter. So at Maxell, MAXCELL. You can share with me the blog post and I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'll read everything that you send me. So
celebrate that win with them. Wonderful. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I will do the backstage shuffle now. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing all these wonderful insights from how to teach and how to learn and how to be a lovely member of the community. So yeah, I will backstage you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Prince. And thank you all of you for hanging out in chat and participating and asking so many wonderful questions. Don't go anywhere. I have a schedule for you. We are streaming 3 times a week. 3 times a day, every day in Hacktoberfest, which means we have 4 more days left. This was our first stream of the day. I'm now going to run you through the schedule, what we've got coming up for the rest of the week. They're all amazing guests, all wonderful people. So don't go anywhere to catch that. First up, thing to mention, if you want to get notified whenever we go live, I said 3 times a day is a lot to keep track of. You can do that by following us here on Twitch. Hit the love heart, then hit the bell. That'll give you notifications. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we tweet an hour before every show at RaisedDevs. Okay, our schedule. Let me do the schedule teaser. So next up is the wonderful folks from Dev2. If you haven't seen Dev2, it's a perfect tangent from the show. Dev2 is basically a writing community for developers. It's a blog. It's a community space. You can start a blog there, and it's a really wonderful place to do your developer blogging. They recently open sourced the platform that Dev2 runs on. It's called Forum. It's a Ruby on Rails app. And today, Dev2 are taking over the show. So they're kicking me off. And it's going to be Nick, who's one of the engineers on Forum, and Christina, who's the open source community manager. They're going to be doing accessibility on Forum. They're going to be trying to, they're doing a no mouse Fridays challenge, which I think means they're trying to add mouse free interfaces to Forum. So they're going to be focusing on accessibility and making Forum more accessible. So that's happening next up on the show in about an hour and 45 minutes, 3 p.m. UTC, 10 a.m. No, that's changed, 11 a.m. Eastern time, I think. Prince can catch me if I've got the time wrong. But yeah, it's happening in about 2.5 hours. It'll be a super cool show. They do wonderful things, and they'll talk about their stream and what's happening for them after Hacktoberfest as well on that show. Then the last show today, he's been in chat, is Marcin from Enzo. Enzo is a visual programming language, which is really interesting because it's dual representation, which means it has a visual language, which is simultaneously updated with a textual language, which is really cool. For example, if you're working cross-functionally with like people who would prefer to work in a visual language versus like people who prefer to work in textual language. That's a really interesting project, not only for the project itself. It's a language aimed at data science, but also because they've had some really interesting journeys in their open source project in the last year. They like made they got to version 1.9 on a certain code base, and then they decided that wasn't scaling and wasn't working how they wanted. So they moved the whole project to a new code base. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and getting behind some of how that programming language works. It's doing some really cool things with the Graal VM, which is like a cutting edge Java virtual machine, and using Truffle, which is like an API in the Graal VM to make interoperation between other languages really, really easy. So that'd be super cool. And Marcin is one of the engineers on the compiler. So we're going to be getting into how some programming languages work. So if you enjoyed that part of what Prince was saying about learning how these languages work and getting under the hood a little bit, that'll be a stream for you. So that's today's schedule. Let me get into the rest of the week. So we'll do this a little bit quicker. Wednesday, Mr. Matt Cowley, who's turned up at the perfect time to be embarrassed. Matt Cowley is the community platform manager at DigitalOcean. If you've been hanging out in the Hacktoberfest Discord or paying attention to Hacktoberfest, you will probably know him as the person who's maintained the Hacktoberfest app and making all these wonderful fixes to keep Hacktoberfest going. He joined us last week to talk about that and to dive into that Hacktoberfest code. He's joining us again tomorrow to show us his other day job because he's not busy enough. We're going to be diving into the CDN.js code. CDN.js is a content distribution network that powers a lot of the web, and we'll be looking at that. Then we have Ramon. Ramon's a Ruby developer. I'm so excited for this one. I'm excited for all of them, but I'm really excited for this in particular because Ramon is we're going to be playing the old code game where we look at an old project from a guest and talk about what they do differently today, except this project is a dance mat controller built on a Raspberry Pi. And I'm told that the dance mat controller, I'm told that the hardware still works. So I'm very excited to see what happens in that. Then we've got Angel Rivera from Circle CI. That'll be hosted by our founder, John Britton. So I won't be on the show. It does work. Thank you, Ramon, for being in chat. I'm super excited to hear about this. So that's tomorrow, Wednesday at the 3 p.m. UTC show. That's the only time. So time clocks in my country changed this week. So I now don't know what times anything is. So UTC is the only time I think in now. Then the last show tomorrow is Angel Rivera with our founder, John Britton. John will be the host and Angel is at Circle CI and they'll be talking about all things continuous integration and continual deployment. Then Thursday, we've got Guan Luca. Guan Luca is what we call More Than Code episode, so showing you some other ways you can contribute to projects in open source during Hacktoberfest and out. Guan Luca is on the special interest group for releases at Kubernetes, which means he works on making sure that Kubernetes gets released and that the releases are, good and demanding of the quality that a project like Kubernetes is. So we're going to be talking about basically all of the processes that go into releasing Kubernetes and how people can get involved in that way. Then we've got Nathaniel from Twilio. Nathaniel actually just an hour ago told me what he wanted to do. Let me find that email. There we go. There it is. So in Nathaniel, we are going to be looking at some old JavaScript code, my favorite game. Looking at old JavaScript code is particularly fascinating because it's not just like a case of what would we do differently today. It becomes like which of these web standards are now completely irrelevant, which is wonderful. We're also going to be talking about Nathaniel's developer journey and their day-to-day work. Nathaniel is a developer advocate at Twilio, which we've spoken about DevRel in a couple of different ways. Every DevRel role looks a little bit different. So it's always exciting to hear different takes on it. And Twilio especially, I think it's fair to say that Twilio were like one of the forerunners in terms of like what DevRel looks like today. So that'd be really cool. And then we have Sam Lanning. Sam Lanning is now a developer at the United Nations, but used to work at SEML, which is like a query language for security. They got acquired by GitHub. Now they're at the UN. We're going to be doing an old code review again on a really cool hardware project. It's like a hardware week. We're going to be doing a code review on something called Synesthesia, which is a controller for LED strip lights and for music that allows you to do like interactive light and sound installations, particularly for festivals, is what Sam built this for. So that's going to be super cool to check out. That's Thursday afternoon. And then Friday, big day on Friday. All these guests are wonderful. All these days are wonderful. But we came up with something mad and exciting last night to end the stream. So we'll get into that. So first up on Friday, Nicholas Carrigan. Nicholas has been a regular fixture in our chat. And so super excited to bring Nicholas from chat onto the show. Then we have Eddie. Eddie's an open source advocate. Eddie, we had Eddie on as one of our first guests, and Eddie does really great work helping people to get into open source, has a really good YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Eddie's been super busy with Hacktoberfest, helping people do the Hacktoberfest contributions. So that's kind of our rest and reflection episode. We're going to talk about how Hacktoberfest has gone, how it's been for Eddie, what Eddie's been up to, and then the final episode of the show, from the fever dream minds here at Raise.dev, is with Chris Ewald, who is a coach and developer here at Raise.dev. Raise.dev, as we've discussed on the show, in a previous lifetime, Raise.dev built the original Hacktoberfest app. Well, not the original Hacktoberfest app. The Hacktoberfest app that's now open source 2 years ago. They built that app to run Hacktoberfest. And now, obviously, Mr. Matt Cowley works on that app. So Matt Cowley's coming back for the third time. And we're going to have old maintainer, new maintainer on the show, where Matt gets to shout at Chris about all the things he messed up. for 90 minutes. It's going to be great. No, it won't be like that at all. But it'd be really cool to really dive into Hacktoberfest code, talk about what it was then, what's changed now, things that they'd keep, things that they'd throw away, get those perspectives from over a lifespan of this app, particularly an app that, sits dormant for most of the year and then gets hammered all in one go, and what were the pressures that led it to be built how it was at the time, and how those pressures kind of fared the weathers of time and how they evolved today. So that will be the last show of this run. We will keep the stream up after, but not 3 times a day, because that would physically kill me. We'll announce the schedule and how we're doing things after Hacktoberfest. But for now, we do just have 4 days left of streams. You've got the schedule at twitch.tv raised schedule. Drop us a follow if you don't want to miss any of that. And then finally, if you haven't heard of Race.dev before, or you're like, what is Race.dev? Why are they doing this thing? We are here to help you level up in your developer career. We want to make sure that you get the experience you need to make whatever jump it is you're trying to make, whether you've been for a boot camp, or you've done a career change and now you're trying to get your first developer job, or whether you are trying to move from mid-level to senior, get a raise, get a promotion, any of those things. And we do that with the help of expert coaches, people who have done it themselves, people who have experience in the industry, people who can teach you the things that you can only learn on the job, and that don't get taught as much or are harder to teach through courses and these kind of things. They will work with you towards your goals. They'll set a project plan with you and work with you and pair program with you towards completing that project. And you can sign up completely for free today at raise.dev. So it's everything for me. Thank you all for hanging out. I will see you in about 2 hours if you join us for the next stream with Dev2. Oh, I'll see you very briefly. You will see the Dev2 folks, and I will hang out in chat with you instead. You won't see me. So in 2 hours, and if you don't join us for that stream, I hope we see you at another one sometime soon. And I hope you have a wonderful day and the rest of your week. Thank you again for joining us here today. And we'll see you soon.